An employee at the Times is claiming DEI policies cost him a promotion.
They had a specific goal to increase Black and Latino representation in leadership by 50% by 2025. You're telling me you're going to increase it by 50% without favoring candidates because they're Black or Latino? How? How is that possible? We need to talk about this really fascinating story playing out at the New York Times, which is, of course, a liberal-leaning, left-leaning newspaper that's been, according to many reports and many, I read a great book by Nellie Bowles about her time working at the New York Times. It's been ideologically captured. They still do some great reporting, don't get me wrong, and they have correspondents all across the world. They have people who do serious writing still and serious reporting and essential stuff. But there is a very extreme left-wing ideological camp within the newspaper as an organization that exerts a lot of pressure and control. And it does appear from the outside looking in to have been captured by pretty solidly progressive social justice ideology. And apparently, this may have even bled into outright racial discrimination and sex discrimination, possibly against, or I think it's just racial discrimination in this case, against white people, which if you lived through the 2020s is not particularly hard to believe. But the Equal Opportunity Commission, which is now, of course, under the Trump administration, is suing the New York Times after they received a complaint from somebody who believes he was discriminated against by the Times for being a white man. And here is a clip from Fox News summarizing the suit, and then we're going to go through some of the details here that make me believe the case may have some merit. But though, of course, everyone is entitled to their day in court before being presumed guilty of anything, and that includes the New York Times. Things aren't looking great for the Gray Lady. We're going to go over it all, but first, here is that report from Fox News.
The white man claiming the New York Times discriminates against white men. An employee at the Times is claiming DEI policies cost him a promotion in 2025. And the Times allegedly broke the story on itself. Now the Trump administration's Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is suing the paper. The lawsuit claims the Times' race and gender goals influenced its decision not to advance the employee. It also claims the final round of candidates matched the race and gender the paper wanted more of in leadership: a white female, Black male, Asian female, and multiracial female. But a spokesperson for the Times denies the claims, calling the case politically motivated, and insists its hiring practices are merit-based.
So, like Will Cain from Fox News notes there, they, of course, deny this charge. They say they didn't break the law, and I do believe, once again, innocent until proven guilty. But I have to say, complaint seems, if you told me that I had to guess or make a prediction about what would happen here, I would say that it's not looking good for the Times, and I'll explain why, in part based on their own public statements. So they put a lot out there, as did a lot of these corporations, during the 2020s, right? The Biden era, the post-George Floyd era. They put out in public writing a lot of DEI promises and material that even at the time, I always wondered, how are companies just doing this? Doesn't this violate anti-discrimination laws? You would see postings for Black BIPOC candidates preferred, people just saying the quiet part out loud. And again, the laws that prohibit racial and sex discrimination never said only in one direction. Always on paper or at face value applied in both directions, but it was just never enforced that way. So they got very comfortable speaking and leaving many a breadcrumb. And maybe they just didn't anticipate that a new administration would come in and really actually not just change the standards going forward, but also crack down on these past violations. But so here is from the 2021 New York Times Diversity and Inclusion Report. They said that making the Times a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive place to work is core to our strategy and a top priority for our journalism, our business, and our company. For the past 5 years, we have published our U.S. employee diversity data publicly, including data on hiring, promotion, and attrition by race, ethnicity, and gender. So they said quite openly, we are striving as a company to make our workforce less white and more diverse racially and on gender basis. They weren't shy about that. And so then there are some ways in which you could pursue that goal without discriminating against anyone. For example, you could widen the pool of where you are soliciting applications. So say that you, and I've never had any issue with this kind of diversity initiative, but like say that you're recruiting, you have recruiters, you're a big company and you recruit from schools across all the country, colleges. You could send more recruiters to historically Black colleges or something to increase the number of Black applicants that you're getting. And then even from a merit-based, colorblind hiring process, you would still theoretically increase your diversity. So it's like not impossible that that companies could pursue diversity goals and see that as something without engaging in any kind of discrimination. But when they openly admit they're focusing on that and literally publishing, bragging about graphs that show their staff becoming less white over time, it all points in a certain direction. And it does seem, I mean, this has been uncovered at many institutions that really went in on this stuff. Disney had a big expose done about them that touched on this. Many public colleges have been called out or exposed for like blatantly racially discriminating in the hiring process to promote diversity. All of this was always divisive and counterproductive, I thought, and then also is illegal. Just because it wasn't enforced doesn't make it not illegal. Anyway, they just brag about this so much and they made such bold promises that it does lend itself towards the impression that the Times would have been engaging in some sort of racial balancing or discrimination in the selection process for who ultimately got promoted or got jobs. More from the Times Diversity Report. The composition of our staff and leadership in the U.S. is becoming steadily more diverse. We saw the largest increase in representation of people of color since we started reporting this data, including across all staff in the newsroom, in our business, and in leadership. We are no longer seeing underrepresentation of women in our workforce or leadership. At the same time, our data shows areas that need additional attention. So while we have gains in representation of people of color in leadership roles, we still have gaps in the racial diversity of leadership compared with our full staff, and we have gaps in promotion and attrition rates among some colleagues of color. So this is fascinating to me because they were really tracking this at a pretty granular level, like who's getting promoted and who's not, and what about this, everything with this, I think, inherently fatally flawed assumption that if we're not discriminating and if we're really a just place, everything will be equally 50-50 across the board. I think that's not how the real world works. And even in, like, for example, some of the most feminist, gender, accepting countries in Scandinavia and other places, you still see some disparities between men and women. And, they don't have as much racial diversity. So I don't know about that. But with the men and women example, and that does suggest that in absence of discrimination, you don't just end up 50-50 in everything, as if there are no differences on average among groups of people or different communities or cultures or in terms of race as well. So if you are really obsessed with getting everything to perfectly equal representation, really the only way that you're going to do that is through reverse discrimination. Like that's why you see that employed as a tactic. If they could do it without that, surely they would have. So the fact that they're so adamantly committed to pursuing that and that that's what they're setting up as their standard does make it more likely to me that they would have gone down that path that they could now legally potentially be held accountable for. I mean, they say this: while many of these results demonstrate meaningful progress, we recognize that it will take continued intentional effort and steady improvement to realize the lasting change we seek. We are committed to making the New York Times a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive company, an even better journalistic operation, and a stronger business. So that's an interesting line there at the beginning. We recognize that it will take continued intentional effort to realize the lasting change we seek of making our workforce less and our leadership less white. I mean, what is that intentional effort? Like I said, there's some things that can be done to pursue diversity goals without active discrimination, but if it's only going to get you so far. And if you're making these promises and you're saying this is like one of your highest possible goals you're totally focused on, you're telling me that then when we finally kind of lift the lid on some of this stuff and they get access to emails and Slack messages, you're not going to see discrimination in who was hired and who was promoted. You're not going to see messages that say, oh, Sean is great, but we really don't have anyone in this leadership group right now that is a person of color. Could we maybe consider this junior candidate from over here? You're telling me we're not going to see some of that as this lawsuit plays out? I don't know. I guess it's possible. Like I said, they deserve the presumption of innocence, but I would put my money 1,000%, knowing what I know and having talked to as many journalists and media personalities who were inside these different companies, including the New York Times, but just generally in mainstream media and kind of left of center media, this ideology was pervasive. And racial balancing is how like they would say it. We could quite easily call it discrimination or reverse discrimination, but that's just discrimination. Was not viewed as particularly controversial or off limits at that time and in that era, even though, again, it was always illegal in these contexts. And so my money's on the fact that they were doing a lot of this and that many skeletons are going to be dragged out of the closet over the next few years. I mean, they literally, at the Times, said they had a specific goal to increase Black and Latino representation in leadership by 50% by 2025. You're telling me you're going to increase it by 50%, the number of Black people and Latinos that were in leadership. I'm surprised they didn't say Latinx. That's a fascinating one, that they didn't use that one. By 2025, so just over the span of 4 years, because this is a 2021 diversity report they published, you're going to increase it that much without favoring candidates because they're Black or Latino. How? How is that possible? That seems impossible. So I think they're probably dead to rights here. But like I said, they say they did nothing wrong, and it's going to come out in the wash here. Now, I want to read you a little bit from the EEOC itself, the announcement they made. And it tells you some details about the specific individual who is alleging discrimination by the Times. Acting in accordance with such goals, this is from the EEOC, the company left a longtime New York Times editor, a white man with extensive experience in real estate journalism, out of its final panel interviews for a vacant deputy real estate editor position in early 2025. Every candidate who advanced through to the final interview process was not a white male. The company ultimately hired an outside candidate for the role, a non-white female with little to no experience in real estate journalism, despite such experience being a requirement for the real estate editor position. Further, the hiring manager greenlit this external candidate for inclusion in the final interview panel without her first going through the standard interview process for the position. Moreover, the New York Times selected this candidate for the position despite the company's own final interview panel rating her less favorably than 2 other candidates. Bruh. If those facts bear out and are true as listed by the EEOC here, come on now. You're telling me that's all a coincidence? I mean, that's pretty blatant. That's pretty diabolical that they had an insider with lots of experience who wasn't even advanced to the final interview process. And then they brought in an outsider with little to no experience in this area of journalism. And that was listed as a requirement that you had to have experience with real estate journalism, which is not just like if you're a fashion correspondent and you apply for a job in real estate journalism, it's quite different. So, of course, it would make sense that would be a prerequisite. And then their own panel rated her less favorably than the other 2 candidates, and she got the job anyway. I don't know. If that's all true, they might be cooked, chat. They may, in fact, be cooked. And there may be a large settlement handed out here down the line. And if that's all true, there probably should be. So here is the EEOC Chair Andrea Lucas. Here is her statement. No one is above the law, including elite institutions. There's no such thing as reverse discrimination. All race and sex discrimination is equally unlawful, according to long-established civil rights principles. The EEOC is prepared to root out discrimination anywhere it may rear its head, no matter the size or power of the employer. The EEOC, under my leadership, will not pull punches in ensuring even-handed, colorblind enforcement of Title VII to protect America's workers, including white males. Federal law is clear. There is no diversity exception to the rules. I think that is a powerful statement. I will say that I do not know the future. I do not have a crystal ball, but I'm going to put my money on the New York Times having, if I'm guessing here, probably done something wrong and probably, in fact, engaged in some of this reverse discrimination, which is just discrimination. And I imagine that as this lawsuit plays out, it will either be settled or they'll ultimately be found responsible because they will get access to chat logs, Slack groups, emails, and all that kind of stuff. And I would be shocked if some damning evidence doesn't come up. But who knows? They say they're innocent. We'll have to wait and see. I just thought this was a fascinating story as kind of a microcosm of, and this is one of the things where I've been very critical of the Trump administration in general, but I do agree with their pushback on a lot of the DEI stuff that really went absolutely insane and overboard. And if they're holding companies and institutions accountable who engage in this kind of behavior, that's something I support. So you guys will have to let me know what you think in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe, hit the like button and all of that. And that'll be it for today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk again real soon.